It's a political problem. It's not a religious problem. That's my point.
90% of Islam is political Islam. About 10% of it is spiritual. So political Islam is a fundamental feature of Islam. There is no Islamism or Islam. There's just Islam.
2006, a few years after 9/11, Judge Richard Posner wrote a book. The book was called Not a Suicide Pact, the Constitution in a Time of National Emergency. And in that book, he argued the following. He argued that our commitment to civil liberties, civil rights and liberties for citizens, has to be balanced against the concerns for national security. Now that sounds dangerous to people. We're going to start limiting people's rights for national security. But what he was really arguing is that, based on this concept that the Constitution is not a suicide pact, which is an old line that goes back over 100 years, that the Constitution and our commitment to rights and freedoms does not force the nation to just sit back and be attacked and endure threats to its very identity and existence. Okay, and that brings to mind the whole issue that we've talked about in a lot of videos, which is the issue of the West's difficulty in dealing with the agenda of Sharia supremacist Muslims who want to bring Sharia law. So they use the rights and freedoms in the West in order to advance their own agenda. And I was thinking about this while I was watching a clip. I was watching an event that took place in England last year. And on stage in this clip I'm going to show you are Saad, the great professor and public intellectual and author from Canada, very outspoken about Islam, and Batya Unger Sargon, who I have great respect for. I know Batya, she's a wonderful person. But in the exchange that Batya has with one of the people in the crowd, with two of the people in the crowd actually, I think in what she says, we have there encapsulated the very conundrum, the very problem that Posner was talking about. And it's really the problem that the West needs to face up to in order to deal with the whole encroachment and takeover of Western countries by Muslims, by Sharia supremacists. And I want to play that clip for you. I have some thoughts about it that I'm going to share. Before we get on with this, please make sure to check out Israel 365 News YouTube channel. That's the other channel where I post content. I'm the executive director of Israel 365 Action and Israel 365 News. We post very important videos that deal with the political situation and deal with a lot of issues that are happening around the world right now. Also very important interviews. We uploaded a fantastic interview that I did with Nick Freitas last week. It's a must watch. And there was also an interview that I did a few weeks ago with Dr. Mordechai Kedar, which you go check out, and many other very informative videos on that channel. So if you're not subscribed to Israel 365 News, please go do that. And then you'll really get more of my content. You'll get a fuller picture of everything that I'm talking about. All right, let's get to this video.
You said it was disgusting to question whether or not a given faith was compatible with the Western values or British culture. And you said there's quite a different context in America to what it is here regarding the grooming gangs. I don't know if you know, and I'd be interested to hear your response to this, see if it changes your mind. In the UK, Pakistani men are overrepresented by a share of 4 in child sex crimes. And when the children who have been abused by these gangs come forward and speak about it, they say they've been branded with the M for Muhammad on themselves, they've been subjected to forced Quran readings, and the families of the rapists have justified the abuse of the girls because they have said they dress immodestly by Muslim standards. And when they ask the police officers, the council workers, the politicians why they didn't speak up for this, in all of the reports, they say for political correctness, for community cohesion, because they didn't want to upset the Muslim community. Now, as well as the security of Jews, which you mentioned, according to the Henry Jackson Society last year, only a quarter of British Muslims think October the 7th happened. Like 3/4 of them think Hamas did nothing wrong, and that's mainly concentrated among university-educated British-born Muslims 18 to 30. So I think we have a very different problem in the UK than we do in the US. So do you still think it's not possible to say Islam is not compatible with Britain?
Okay. Okay. I want to take questions in groups of 3, and to give them a chance to think about this.
No,
and
I want to answer that.
Oh, do you want to answer that right away?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right. Go.
Like, I'm sorry, those are your citizens. Citizenship is the only human right that every person has a right to. When you have citizens of your country, I'm not arguing that you don't have a cultural problem here in a certain subset of the citizenry of your country. But a country is made up of the people who live there who have that legal right. You need to work a lot harder on changing hearts and minds, because you cannot simply say that a certain citizen of your country is not compatible. And by the way, we have statistics like that in America. There are certain subpopulations who are much more overrepresented in child sex crimes. It would never occur to me to suggest that they are less citizens. Like, citizenship is a sacred thing. What are you suggesting, that they be denaturalized? Like, that is insane. That is utter. You do not have a democracy if you think you can denaturalize people based on their ideas.
I'm a scientist, so I think very analytically, okay? So take, for example, Sharia law, right? In Sharia law, it says that a crime will be punished differently as a function of the identity of the perpetrator and the victim. So if a Jewish man were to kill a Muslim man, it wouldn't be the same penalty as if it were reversed. I can give you all of the sources that support that Sharia ruling.
God, I have some bad news for you about the Talmud. Sorry.
But I'll ignore that for a second. So that said, you take a fundamental principle from Lady Justice being blind, where you don't do that in American jurisprudence. Those two realities are antithetical to each other. I'm not aware of too many Talmudic extremists who are trying to...
Well, exactly. It's a political problem. It's not a religious problem. That's my point.
90% of Islam is political Islam. About 10% of it is spiritual. So political Islam is a fundamental feature of Islam. There is no Islamism or Islam. There's just Islam. Erdogan, the Turkish president, has said so. 75,000 other Islamic clerics have said exactly the same thing. So we don't have many people who are trying to infuse Talmudic principles within American jurisprudence. We are seeing in the West an incursion of Sharia principles that is incompatible. So I don't think Muslims are incompatible with the West, because I may have a lot more in common with a Muslim secularist than I might have with an Orthodox Jew. So to say Muslims are not allowed in the West, I would completely disagree with. But are there tenets of Islam, to your point, that are perfectly incompatible with the West? Nothing could be clearer. A 3-day-old pigeon understands that.
Okay. We'll go here and then there at the end. Go ahead. Yeah.
We're in England, and I'm not an Englishman. I'm here as a guest in this country, and as a part of a guest community in this country, we have to behave ourselves. If I had guests in my house, I'd expect them to behave themselves, and if they didn't, and they started doing all sorts of awful things to my sister, for example, they'd be kicked out of the house. We need to understand that citizenship is not actually that important. What's more important than citizenship is inheritance. And the English have inherited this land. This is their land. We're here not as a right, we're here at their preference. And if a community doesn't understand that, they've got no right to be here at all.
I think that's one of the saddest things I've ever heard, and I'm going to be haunted by the spectacle of you standing there and saying that. If someone in my country said that, I would ask myself what I'm doing wrong. I mean, the idea that a citizen would call themselves a guest based on their religion is horrific to me. The whole point of my country is that that is completely anathema. If somebody made a Jew feel that way in my country, I don't even know what I would do to them. I will be haunted by that for a long time.
That second questioner was an Orthodox Jew, a British Orthodox Jew, who was saying, look, we're guests in England, and what's more important than citizenship is inheritance, and that England belongs to British people. Very interesting way he formulated it, but you see that Batya found this so offensive. And she talks about the fact that these Sharia supremacist Muslims, no matter how much we're upset by the crimes they commit, are citizens, and they have the rights of citizenship. And what Saad was trying to say politely was, well, not exactly, because when you're talking about a political system, that's a different story here. Now, let me first deal with that whole Talmud exchange they had there. When Saad mentioned that as an example of Sharia law, that Sharia law treats people differently in terms of crimes committed based on who the perpetrator and who the victim was. If it's a Muslim perpetrator on a non-Muslim victim versus the reverse, then the laws are different. And Batya said, well, I've got bad news for you from the Talmud. What she was talking about is that in Talmudic law, remember the Talmud was compiled over the course of a few centuries, but it was a done deal about 1,500 years ago or so. And in the Talmud, yes, there are laws there that it says that according to Jewish law, there are situations where the law for Jews and the law for non-Jews is different in a Jewish society in, again, a very, very long time ago. The major difference there is that no one is forced to live in a Jewish society. Okay, meaning according to the original Talmudic law. This is not the case in Israel today. There's no difference whatsoever if someone's a Jew or not a Jew in terms of the application of the law. It's an artifact really of history. It's in the Talmudic law. It's just simply not practiced at all today, that aspect of the law. But a key distinction that God didn't make, he doesn't know the Talmudic law. A key distinction is that no one is forced to live in the Jewish society. So anyone choosing to live in this idealized Jewish society run by Talmudic law, which doesn't exist, no one is forced to join that, because the Jewish nation state is only supposed to be in a very confined area with borders that are laid out by God in the Bible, a very small area, and therefore you choose to live under it. No one's forced. That's a key distinction. Anyway, Batya was raising that issue. But the real issue in this exchange is what Batya said about citizenship. And here I think that her being appalled misses the big point, and it really speaks to the confusion and the problem facing the West. So let's get straight to that point. Citizenship in a country like the UK comes with rights. Right, you have the right of free speech, legal protections, participating in the political process. But those rights come from a system. Okay, they're not abstract truths. They come from a system. They're grounded in the legal order of the state. What that means is that citizenship assumes a basic commitment to that legal order. That doesn't mean you agree with every law, or that you can't criticize it, or that you won't commit crimes. Of course, you will, and you don't lose your citizenship. But the line that I would draw, and the line that I think is legally valid to draw, is the line between criticizing the system and advocating and seeking to replace it entirely. So when someone says, I believe that Sharia law should replace the law of the United Kingdom ultimately, and that's my goal. But it's not just that I state that as a belief, but my community and my leadership, we're actively working towards that goal, to have Sharia law replace British law. That is no longer a religious belief. That's no longer a personal belief. It is a political objective, and that's what Saad was talking about. It's a statement about governance, about legitimacy of governance, about which system of law should rule the land. So once you understand that, the comparison then becomes obvious. If someone said, I want to overthrow the current system and replace it with the communist legal order, we wouldn't treat that as just another opinion or say that it's a religious belief, right? If you have a group of people who are organizing to overthrow the US government or whatever country you live in and replace it with a different type of governance system that's not legitimate. What you recognize that as a movement that's against the system, that's illegal. And people who do that are then deprived of their rights. They're treated as criminals, as enemies, not because of who they are or what they believe, but because of what they are trying to do. What they're trying to do is replace the existing legal system, the existing governance, with something else. And the same standard has to apply consistently, because this is not about religion. Again, it's about the desire to replace a legal system, the prevailing legal system in the West, with another one. And that brings us back to citizenship. If your rights come from a legal system, what does it mean if you are actively working to dismantle that system and replace it? At the very least, it puts you in direct tension with the basis of the rights that you are utilizing in order to do this. Right? There's a very big difference between trying to reform a system and replace a system. Okay, so if you want to change the system because you want to make reforms, you say, what you're basically saying is, I agree with the system, but I don't like this or that law. The system needs improvement. But if you're actively saying that you want to replace the system, as Muslims do say, they say that every system of law is illegitimate other than Sharia. They're saying that this system, the system of rights and privileges, of citizenship, and the legal system in the West is illegitimate and needs to be replaced. Those are not the same thing. Reform and replacement are not the same thing. A free society depends on people wanting to reform it. It is constantly evolving and changing. But a free society can't allow the freedom to engage in questioning and reform and challenging the authority to then spill over into allowing replacement efforts, people who are trying to replace the society. I hope that made sense. See, here's the inconsistency. When people are overtly political actors, they're communists, they're fascists, and they are trying to overthrow the government, they're trying to replace the political system with communism or fascism, everyone recognizes that as a threat, and it's treated as insurrection or sedition or treason. But when the same claim is made, but it's under the banner of a religion, suddenly everyone's like, no. Oh, freedom of religion. Islam is a religion. That's their faith. But there shouldn't be any distinction, because the issue has nothing to do with in what way the person believes it. Do they believe it as a religious system, or they believe it, or is it theological, or is it just that they're a communist? The issue is what they are trying to do. What is the objective? If the objective is to replace the governing legal order, then by definition, that is a challenge to the state. And if the state refuses to recognize that that is undermining its own, if a state refuses to recognize that, then it's undermining its own foundation. So the question isn't whether people are free to believe what they want. Of course they are. The question is whether advocating for the replacement of an entire legal system is treated as participation in the system, or is it opposition to the system? I hope this made sense. Let me say it another way. If you can't distinguish between citizens who operate within the system of a society and citizens who are seeking to replace the system of the society, that's not tolerance anymore. You have to choose to defend yourself. Okay, and this is the big problem facing the West right now. That, everyone has rights, and you're free to say and believe whatever you want. And Islam is a religion, so there's religious freedom, and you can't impinge on people's religious rights. But but Islam's goal is a political goal. And at some point, the West is going to have to say, even those Muslims in our country who are born and raised here, that's what that first questioner was saying. We have UK-born Muslims who want to implement Sharia law in the UK. And if Batya is right, and you say, well, they're citizens, these are full citizens, they can, if they democratically take over England and turn it into a Sharia state, then that's, then they're free to do that. But then you go to that question, you go to the second questioner, that Orthodox Jew who's British, who's saying, listen, I'm a guest in this country. And what he's saying is that there's such a thing as the British nation. and they have certain characteristics, and they are the true owners of this land. The idea of a national identity and national ownership and the right to have a national character that you preserve and that you protect, and that people who are coming in to join your society are guests. Even if they become citizens, they're joining your society and your norms. And this is where the confusion of the West, and frankly, Batya's confusion here, comes to the fore, that this unwillingness to stand up and say, wait a second, we have an identity here, and we're not, and we have to say no at some point and say, we're not going to allow our identity, what it means to be British, what it means to be American, what it means to be French. We're not going to stand up and defend against people, whether they're citizens or not, who come into our society and try to undo it and remake it in the image of a completely different legal order and a completely different culture. This is the problem facing the West. This is it encapsulated here. And Batya is a good person. She holds most of her political views I very much agree with, but you see here the confusion. You see here what Saad often calls suicidal empathy, and this is exactly what Posner was warning about. Not a suicide pact. You can't say that you adhere to all, that everyone has equal rights as citizens to the extent that they use those rights to try to undermine and destroy the very system that grants those rights.